If Sorrel had been the sort of woman who minded her own business, none of what followed would ever have happened. But then, if the king had troubled himself to look after his own beast, there would have been nothing for her to mind in the first place. So, when she weighed it all out honestly, and she would weigh it a great many times in the months to come, the whole ruinous business began and ended with him. Every stitch of it, every last drop of blood. She was, by every account, including her own, the least remarkable soul in the war camp. A wound tender, a girl who stitched horses and splinted the legs of hounds, and slept in the straw beside the creatures she mended, because a mended creature rested easier with a warm body near it. She was tall and quiet and plain as a fence rail, and it suited her. People who went unnoticed were people who were left alone, and being left alone was the only luxury a low-born girl could truly afford. The Battle of Merriford had been over for 2 days, and the camp still stank of it, smoke and tallow, and the sour reek of wounds that would not close. Caldmere had won, if a field with that many dead on it could be called a winning, and the Scarn had broken and fled back up their grey mountains, and now there was nothing to do but count the cost. Sorrel counted it in animals. 19 horses she could not save, a whole kennel of warhounds down to 9. She had not slept properly since the drums, and then there was the beast. Everyone in Caldmere knew of the king's beast, though few had ever been fool enough to stand close to it. It owned no proper name that Sorrel had heard, only the names men give to things they fear. The Grey Death, the Bone-Right, the king's own horror. It stood taller at the shoulder than a plough horse, all scarred hide and old iron muscle, a wolf grown to a size that wolves have no business reaching, and it had broken the Scarn charge at Merriford and turned the tide of the whole battle. Across the years it had put more than one handler in the infirmary, and so the beast masters handled it the way a person handles a lit fuse, from as far off as the rope would reach. Now it was dying, and no one would go near enough to stop it. Sorrel found it chained in the farthest paddock, set apart from everything, the way the truly dangerous are always kept apart. It had taken a spear low in the flank and another along the ribs, and the wounds had gone bad in the heat, and it lay in its own filth with its great sides heaving. Every time a handler came within 10 paces, it dragged itself upright and snarled with what strength it had left, and so the handlers had stopped coming. "Leave it," said the beast-master, a hard man named Garrick, when he caught her looking. "King's order was to tend it. King's beast won't be tended, so it dies, and none of us loses a hand over it. That is the end of the matter." But it was not the end of the matter, because Sorrel could not stop looking at it. She had spent her whole life close to suffering animals, and she knew the difference between a beast that wants to kill you and a beast that only wants the hurting to stop. This one had given up on anyone helping it. It had decided, in whatever way such creatures decide things, that it would sooner die alone than let another human hand touch it, and something about that certainty broke a small, clean crack straight through the middle of Sorrel's good sense. She should have walked away. She knew exactly what touching a king's bonded beast without leave could cost a girl of her station: her hands, if the king was merciful; her life, if he was not. She went and fetched a bucket of clean water and a bundle of clean rags instead. "Sorrel!" Garrick's voice had gone flat with warning. "Don't you dare!" She was already ducking under the paddock rail. The beast heaved itself up, or tried to, and got halfway, and snarled at her, a low, grinding sound she felt in the soles of her feet. She stopped. She did not look it in the eye, because you never look a frightened thing in the eye. She set the bucket down. She lowered herself into the muck beside it, well within reach of a jaw that had unmade a grown man, and she did the only thing she had ever truly known how to do with a creature past all hope. She began to talk to it, low and dull and endless, the same soft nothing she murmured to colts in a thunderstorm. And she reached into the bucket, and she wrung out a rag, and she began, very slowly, to wash the worst of the battle filth from its ruined flank. It went rigid under her hands. She kept washing. It shuddered. One long, full-body shudder, and made a sound she had never heard a beast make, something almost like grief. And she kept washing, easing the crusted black filth away from the torn edges of the wound, murmuring her soft, dull nothing all the while. And the beast, the gray death, the king's own horror, that had suffered no living hand to touch it in 6 long years, lowered its enormous scarred head into the straw beside her knee and let her be. Sorrel did not notice that the camp had gone silent. She did not notice the handlers backing away, or the whisper running man to man like a spark down a fuse line, or the crowd thickening at the paddock rail. She noticed none of it until a voice spoke behind her, dry and quiet, and terribly amused. "Well," it said, "that is not a thing I ever expected to see." She turned. A man stood at the rail, and she took him at first for one of the wounded, because he was filthy with 2 days of dried blood and road dust, a plain, dark cloak thrown over what she took for a common soldier's leathers. He was watching her with pale eyes that did not match the rest of him at all, eyes far too still and far too certain. The eyes of a man who had never once in his life had to ask twice for anything. "You have a gift," he said. "It has let no one near it, not the handlers, not the masters." A pause. Something moved behind the pale eyes. "Not even me." And Sorrel, kneeling in the blood and the straw, with her hand still resting on the flank of the untouchable thing, watched every soldier along that rail sink slowly to one knee, and understood, far too late, exactly whose beast she had just bathed like a foal. There is a particular flavor of silence that settles over a place when a good many people are waiting to learn whether you will be put to death. Sorrel was becoming acquainted with it. She had not been put to death. Not yet. The filthy man had indeed been the king. The kneeling had rather settled that question. King Emmerich of Caldmere had looked at her a long moment there in the blood and straw, and said only 3 words, "See that it lives," and then turned and walked off into the dark with his ruined cloak dragging behind him. No guards had seized her, no sentence had been spoken. She had finished washing the beast because she had not known what else to do with her hands, and then she had walked back to the tender's fire on legs that did not feel like her own, and sat down to wait for the sky to fall. It was Mirren who found her there. Mirren had been beast mistress of Greyhold since before Sorrel was born, and she was the nearest thing to a mother Sorrel had ever owned. She had found Sorrel at 8 years old, half wild and starving in the kennel yards, after the fever took both her parents in one gray week, and instead of turning the child out, she had put a sick pup in her arms and said, "Mind that it lives." Sorrel had minded it, and it had lived. And, in a manner of speaking, Sorrel had lived, too. Everything gentle that Sorrel knew, Mirren had taught her. She loved the old woman past all sense. And Mirren, when she came round the fire and saw Sorrel's face, went the color of ash. "Tell me it is not true," Mirren said. "Tell me the whole camp has it wrong. Tell me you did not lay hands on his beast." "I could not leave it to die, Mirren." "You would not have left it either." "I would have left it," Mirren said fiercely, and took Sorrel's face in her 2 rough hands. "God's child, I would have left 100 of them. Do you know what he could do to you? Do you understand what that animal is? It is bonded to him, soul to soul, the way the old alphas bonded to their war beasts in the songs. A creature like that is a piece of the king himself. And you walked up to a living piece of the king and put your hands on it without his leave, in front of his whole army. He did not punish me." Sorrel hated how small her voice had gone. "He told me to keep it alive. That was all." "That is not mercy," Mirren said. "That is a man who is not decided yet. Kings do not forget a thing like this, Sorrel. They put it away somewhere careful and take it out again when it suits them." She let go of Sorrel's face and pressed the heels of her hands to her own eyes, and for a moment she looked every one of her years. "You clever, reckless girl. Of all the beasts in all the world." Sorrel said nothing. She was thinking of the way the beast had shuddered under her hands. That sound like grief, the great scarred head coming down into the straw. She was thinking that she would do it again, and that this was probably the whole of the problem. They are saying he should have died at Merrowford, Mirren went on, lower now half to herself. That the line broke on his flank where no line had any business breaking, and the beast pulled him out of it with 2 spears in its own body. That it was the beast that saved him, not his generals. Some are whispering it was no honest break at all, that someone wanted that flank to fold, and whispers of that kind do not stay whispers for long. She shook her head. A king who nearly falls is a king with enemies who nearly won. There will be knives out over this. Mark me. It is a bad season to become interesting to great men, and you, my girl, have just made yourself very interesting indeed. The fire had burned low when Fen came running. He was the youngest of the tenders, all elbows and earnestness, and he skidded into the firelight white-faced and gasping. Sorrel, he got out. You are wanted now, up at the command tent. He swallowed. The king has sent for you, himself by name. Around the fire, every tender went still. Mirren's hand closed hard about Sorrel's wrist. Sorrel, she said, very low, and there was something in her voice now that had not been there before, something Sorrel was far too frightened to read properly, and would only come to understand much, much later. Whatever he asks of you in that tent, whatever he offers you, you come to me first. Do you hear? Before you answer him, before you agree to anything, you come and you tell me every word of it. But Sorrel was already on her feet, and her heart was slamming, and the whole camp seemed to be watching her walk toward the one tent in the world she least wished to enter. She did not look back. Long afterward, when she tried to trace the exact moment she had begun keeping things from the old woman who had raised her, she would land on this one and be wrong about it. The command tent was plainer than Sorrel had imagined, a soldier's tent, with maps weighted flat by daggers and a cot that had not been slept in. 2 silent guards brought her in without laying a hand on her, which was somehow worse than being dragged, and left her in the lamplight. And there he was, cleaned of the blood. He was still no court beauty, and it made no difference at all. In the paddock, drunk on her own daring, she had taken him for a common soldier. Now, with nowhere to look but at him, she felt the truth of him the way her wolf felt weather coming on. The air pulled tight around a true alpha, and every instinct she owned came to attention beneath her skin. He could not have counted more than 27 years, and yet there was a stillness to him, the unhurried certainty of a man who had never once needed to raise his voice, to be obeyed. She dropped to her knee, fixed her eyes on the floor, and waited to learn the price. "Stand up," the king said. "I cannot talk to the top of a person's head." She stood. "Your name." "Sorrel, your grace, Sorrel." He turned the word over as though testing whether it would hold weight. "I have paid 6 of the finest beastmasters in Codmere a great deal of good coin across 6 years. Not one of them has done what you did tonight, with a bucket and a rag. I am sorry, your grace. I had no leave. I will take whatever discipline is owed. Only I would ask that it not fall on the beast-mistress. She knew nothing of it. It was mine to answer for." Something flickered over his face. There, and then gone. "Discipline," he repeated, and the corner of his mouth curved, and Sorrel realized with a lurch that the king of Caldmere was, of all the impossible things, amused. "You knelt in the muck beside a creature that has faced down better men than either of us, soothed it to sleep, and now you stand in my tent apologizing for it. No, discipline is not what the evening calls for." He came round the table unhurried, and she made herself hold still. "That beast is dying," he said, "and it is bonded to me, soul to soul, so that when it dies a piece of me goes into the ground with it. Every master I own has failed it. Then a wound tender no one has heard of walks up, and it lays its head in her lap." He stopped an arm's length from her. Close to, his eyes were the pale gray of river ice, and just as easy to fall through. "You will come to Greyhold, and be its warden, and you will not leave its side until it stands on its own 4 legs. That is not a request. Kings do not make requests." but it seems only fair to tell you what you were agreeing to, before you agree." Sorrel's mouth had gone dry. "And if I cannot save it, then we shall both be very sorry," he said pleasantly. "But that will not be the trouble. The trouble will be something else." "What trouble, your grace?" He smiled, and it did not reach the ice of his eyes at all. "The court will want to know why my untouchable beast let a nameless girl bathe it. Wolves are superstitious creatures. They will call it an omen, the beast choosing a keeper. And after Merrowford, a king, who nearly lost his war, could use the gods appearing to stand at his shoulder. So we let them believe it. You will be the girl the king's own horror chose. It is a better story than the truth, which is only that you are kind and brave and entirely without sense." And there it was, laid plain. How? To refuse a king was death, or the slower death of exile. To agree was to be torn out of her small, safe, unnoticed life and set down at the center of a court that would despise her, chained to a dying monster, and to a man who wore his charm the way a blade wears a sheath, over something sharp. "Why do I feel," she said slowly, before she could think better of it, "that keeping your beast breathing is not the whole of what you want from me?" The amusement went out of him all at once, the way a lamp goes out when it is pinched. For one bare moment, something else looked out from behind the river ice, something tired and watchful, and far older than 27 years. "Because you are clever," he said quietly. "I did warn myself about that." Then, before she could ask what he meant, he raised his voice toward the tent flap. "Bring it in. Gently, let the warden meet her charge." The flap drew back, and they brought the beast. It came slow and three-legged and terrible, leaning its vast, wounded weight on two handlers who held their ropes loose and their faces bloodless. The moment it saw Sorrel, the awful tension went out of it, and it swung its great scarred head toward her and huffed a breath that stirred her hair, and she set her hand on its muzzle without thinking. Behind her, the king let out a slow breath of his own. And then Mirren stepped through the flap. She had come, after all, the way. She always came for Sorrel, wringing her hands, her kind creased face full of worry, her mouth already opening to plead the girl's case. The beast went still. Every hair along its ruined spine rose at once. Its lips peeled back, from teeth, the length of Sorrel's fingers, and a sound came out of it that was nothing like the grief of the paddock, a low, flat, murderous hum, with no bottom to it. It lunged against the ropes so hard that both handlers were hauled a full stride across the floor, its whole straining body aimed at the old woman in the doorway. "Down!" Sorrel gasped, both hands on it now, throwing her weight against a creature that outweighed her 10 times over. "Down! It is only Mirren! Down!" And, slowly, for her alone, it subsided, still shaking, still fixed on the doorway with those yellow eyes. "The poor brute has never cared for me," Mirren said with a small shaken laugh, one hand at her throat. "I have muzzled it too often over the years, I expect. It remembers its grudges." Everyone breathed again. Sorrel breathed again, and stroked the great, trembling neck, and thought no more of it. She filed the whole strange moment away, under the plain savagery of a dying animal. She would think of it again. She would think of it many times through the long, cold season coming, and wish to every god she had prayed to that she had understood right then exactly what her beast had been trying so hard to tell her. Greyhold was a great gray fist of a fortress crouched on the northern cliffs, older than the kingdom it ruled, its walls the color of a winter sky, and its gates tall enough to swallow a warband whole. Sorrel had heard of it all her life the way a person hears of the moon, a thing that existed and had nothing to do with her. Now she rode in through those gates as warden of the king's beast, and every soul in the vast courtyard turned to look at her, and not one of them looked kindly. She understood the shape of it within a day. She had not been raised up. She had been put on display, the girl the beast chose. The omen The king had handed his frightened court after Marrowford, a low-born nobody in borrowed grey wool set at the heart of the oldest hold in Caldmere, so that high-born wolves might look at her and believe the gods watched over them once more. They resented her for it, the way people resent a thing they have been ordered to be grateful for. The handlers resented her worse. Garrick had come north with the beast, and watched her tend it with his jaw set like a man chewing gravel, because a beast master who cannot touch his own charge has nothing left but his pride, and she had taken even that. The beast was kept in the hollow, a deep stone yard sunk at the foot of the west tower, walled twice over, with an old kennel cut into the living rock, where the war beasts of dead kings had slept and died. It was grim and cold, and Sorrel loved it at once because it was quiet and full of clean straw, and the only creature in it that mattered did not care how low she had been born. She all but moved into it. There was a cell off the yard with a cot she rarely used, because the beast slept easier when she slept beside it in the straw, a wall of scarred gray muscle rising and falling at her back. It mended slowly. The rib wound closed clean under her hands. The flank fought her, wept and swelled and tore open again, and she fought it back, poultice by poultice, until at last the flesh held and the fever guttered out and the great yellow eyes began to track her across the yard with something in them that was no longer only pain. Wenna found her on the fourth day, and Sorrel could have wept for the relief of one friendly face. Wenna was a tender too, round and freckled, and frightened of nothing on 4 legs or 2, and had talked her way north in the beast's baggage train, on a lie and a good deal of nerve. "Someone has to see that you eat," she said, dropping into the straw as though a war beast were not watching her from a few feet off, "since you have plainly decided to wed the monster and forget the rest of us." "When did you last sleep under a roof?" Sorrel laughed, and it surprised her. How rusty it sounded. She had not laughed in a long while. The War Master came on the 5th day, and did not trouble to announce himself. Osric was a great, silent slab of a man, gray at the temples, an old scar tugging one corner of his mouth into permanent doubt. He had served 3 kings, trusted precisely no one, and made no exception for a wound tender the beast happened to favor. He watched her work a long while, without a word, the way a man watches a plain wall he suspects of hiding a door. "You sleep down here," he said at last. It was not a question. The beast rests easier for it. "My lord, so I am told." His flat gaze moved across the yard, the kennel mouth, the 2 gates, the doubled walls, and she understood he was seeing not straw and stone, but lines of approach. "You came up out of nowhere, girl, and now you sleep in arm's reach from the deadliest animal in the kingdom, the very thing the king's life is knotted to. You will forgive an old soldier for finding that too interesting." "I did not ask for any of it." "No," he said. "The ones who arrange these things seldom do the asking," and he left her with that sitting in her chest like a swallowed stone. The king came at night. She did not hear him arrive. She woke in the straw to the beast, lifting its head not in alarm but in a kind of grave attention, and there was a Merrick at the rail of the hollow with no guards and no crown. A lamp turned low beside him, watching the 2 of them like a man at the sight of something he cannot afford to want. "It knows your step," she said, because she did not know what else to say to a king at midnight. "It lifts its head like that for no one else. Does it?" He came down the worn steps into the yard, slow, and the beast made no complaint, and he crouched a little apart and looked at the healing flank with an expression she could not read. "6 years I have had this creature. It has slept at the foot of my bed since it was a pup that fit in my 2 hands, and in all that time it has let no living soul but me touch it." Then a girl with a bucket walks up in a field of dead men. He glanced at her sidelong, the ghost of the paddock's dry amusement in it, worn thinner now and wearier. "You unsettle a great many people, Sorrel, myself among them." She should have looked away. She held his pale eyes instead, and for a moment the crown was nowhere in the yard, and there was only a tired young man and a battered animal, and a girl who had never in her life known when to lower her gaze. Then the beast made a sound. Not the grief sound, not the murder hum, something worse. A thin high whine. She had never heard from it. And it heaved up off the straw and staggered, its legs folding wrong beneath it, its breath coming in ragged heaves. In the same instant, across the yard, the king went gray to the mouth and caught the rail with both hands as though the ground had pitched under him. Emmerich, she was on her feet. She did not notice she had used his name. "What is happening to it?" he said thickly. "I can feel it. I can feel it going." But Sorrel was already on her knees at the great head, her hands buried in its ruff, and she smelled it then, under the straw and the old blood, the faint sweet stink of bitter almond on its breath and rising off the fouled water in its trough. Poison. Someone had come into the hollow, past her, past the doubled walls, past the War Master's careful lines of approach, and put death in the water of the one creature in the kingdom the king could not live without. And they had done it this night. The single night. The king had come down alone to stand at its rail, which meant either the foulest luck in the world or something that was not luck at all. What followed was the longest night of Sorrel's life, and she spent nearly all of it with her arms in a dying monster she knew almond poison. She had lost animals to it before, to bad feed and to spite, and she knew there was one chance and that it was an ugly one. She forced the beast's great jaws apart and drove her fingers down its throat and made it bring up the fouled water. Again and again, while it thrashed, while its claws laid long scratches down her forearms that she would not feel until morning. She called for charcoal and clean water and the bitter purging root she carried in her kit, and it was Emmerich who fetched them, a king on his knees in the straw, doing the work of a stable boy, because the other choice was to kneel there and feel his own soul guttering out through the animal in her arms. They did not speak of the crown, there was no room for it. There was only the next hour, and the next the beast's breathing, the color of its gums, the terrible gray cast of the king's face that eased by a hair each time the animal rallied. Somewhere in the blackest stretch of it, with the beast's head in her lap and her hands raw to the wrist, Sorrel looked up and found Emmerich, watching her across the animal's body, with something unguarded in his face, and neither of them looked away, and it was not the crown that passed between them then. By the gray edge of dawn, the beast slept, and it was true sleep, and it would live. The king sat back against the cold kennel wall, as though his strings had been cut. For a while, neither of them had the strength to speak. "It was not Merriford," he said at last, to the roof beams, in the flat voice of a man too tired to guard his words. "That is the thing you have been too courteous to ask, the flank that broke, the ambush that should never have found us. It was not the fortune of war. Someone opened that door for the scarn and walked them up to my throat, and when the beast dragged me out of it alive, they simply changed their aim." He turned his head against the stone and looked at her. "And now they have come for the beast, because they are cleverer than I gave them credit for. Kill the man and you have a martyr and a war. Kill the beast, and the king merely sickens, and fades, and dies of grief in his own hall, and no one ever swings for it." Sorrel sat very still under the sleeping weight of the animal. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked me in the tent whether keeping the beast breathing was the whole of what I wanted from you, a ghost of the old dryness. It was not. I needed someone, the beast trusted, in the one place I could not watch myself, who owed nothing to anyone, in this hold. I needed eyes that were not already bought." He shut his own for a moment. "I did not think I would need them quite so soon. I am sorry for it. I have set you in the path of a thing that has already killed to reach me." "Then we had better catch it quickly," Sorrel said, "before it learns to aim at the warden too." And he huffed something that was almost a laugh, and it turned her chest over in a way she had no name for and did not entirely trust. It was Mirren who came at first light when the word had run through the hold, and she came the way she had always come. straight to Sorrel, with her arms out and her kind face broken open with fear. They told me, oh, they told me. I ran the whole way. Let me look at you. She caught Sorrel's clawed forearms in her hands and made a wounded sound at the blood. Look what it did to you. Look what that creature did. It was not the beast, Mirren, it was whoever poisoned the beast. And at the sound of the old woman's voice, the animal dragged one eye open out of its healing sleep, and a low warning rumble started up in its chest, and Sorrel laid her hand flat to its neck and hushed it without thinking, the way she had a dozen times before. Easy. Easy. She is a friend. Mirren drew her hands back with a small, hurt laugh and said the brute would be the death of her one day. It had never once cared for her, and Sorrel told her not to mind it. It was sick and half-poisoned and frightened, and let the matter go. She had a great deal else to think of. She did not see Osric at the rail above, watching the beast watch Mirren, saying nothing at all. The War Master caught her alone within the hour. The almond water, he said, without greeting. That is no soldier's poison, girl. No bravo off the docks would know to use it, nor where to find it, nor how much a trough that size would take. That is a handler's poison, brewed from a handler's stores, carried into a warded yard by someone who knew exactly how to cross it without setting the animal screaming. His doubtful mouth was a hard, flat line. It was one of your own that did this, one of the Hollow's own people, someone that beast knows well enough not to raise the alarm for. That is not possible, Sorrel said. I would stake my life on every hand in this yard. You are staking his, Osric said, and tipped his gray head toward the tower where the king had gone. Not yours. And far below in the straw, quiet now, the beast lay with its yellow eyes open, fixed without a blink on the steps where Mirren had climbed away. And for the first time in her life, Sorrel felt something cold move through her that she did not want to name. So she named it nothing and turned away, and told herself it was only the long night talking. The beast mended after that, as though it had made up its mind to, and the season turned along with it. Autumn came down hard off the northern sea and packed the hollow full of cold, and Sorrel learned the shape of her strange new life. By day, she was the warden, sneered at in the yards, curtsied at with poisoned sweetness, by court wolves, who a month before would have stepped over her body in the road. By night, the hold put away its performances, and a Merrick came down to the hollow, and she learned the shape of him instead. They told each other it was the hunt that brought him, and there was truth in it. They went carefully through the hollow's people together in the long dark hours, the handlers, the feed, the gate rota, who held keys, and who had held them before, and turned up nothing which told its own story, because it meant the hand they wanted was careful and patient and trusted past questioning. But the hunt did not need him at midnight. It did not need her to learn the way his mouth set when he spoke of his dead father, or the way he listened to her wholly, as though what she said might move him, which no one had troubled to let a king believe in a very long time. There came a night when the wind screamed over the west tower, and the beast lay stretched at ease between them and the straw, its great head on Merrick's knee, its tail against Sorrel's hip. You know it will not settle like this for anyone, he said, watching it. Not for me alone. Not for you alone. Only for the two of us together. Osric has marked it. He has the sense not to say it aloud. He looked up, and the lamp was low, and the careful distance had gone out of his face. There is an old word for what a war beast does. When it settles for two. My grandmother's handlers used it. I have spent a month trying not to think it. Then do not, Sorrel said, though her heart had begun to slam. Say the other thing instead. The thing you truly came down here to say. I did not come down here to say anything. He reached across the sleeping animal and set his hand, very lightly, along her jaw, as though she too were a creature that might bolt. I came because this is the one place in my kingdom. And because you look at me as though I am only a man, and I have wanted, for some while, to learn what you would do if I behaved like one. She met him over the back of the sleeping beast. The kiss was slow and careful, and then, not careful at all, and it tasted of cold air and of something turning over in her that had been shut a very long time. Beneath them the beast let out one long contented breath and did not stir, wholly at peace with the two of them at last. And Sorrel understood, without a single word for it, that this was right, in a way that nothing in her whole life. It was Emmerich who drew back first, his brow against hers, his breath unsteady. "This is not safe," he said, very low. "For you hear me. Someone in this hold has already killed once to get at me, and every single thing I let myself want becomes a door they can come through. Everyone I have ever—" And he stopped, and she felt the ice come down over him again, like a portcullis, deliberate, and meant to shield her. "I will not hang a target about your neck, not yours." So he left her, which was a cruelty of the good kind, the kind that means to be gentle and manages only to be lonely. And Sorrel lay a long while in the straw, with the beast breathing beside her and her mouth still warm and her mind turning and turning on the one thing they had never been able to crack. A handler's poison, a trusted hand. Someone the beast knew well enough not to scream for. She had told the king she would stake her life on every hand in the yard, and she had meant it. She had simply never thought to look higher than the yard, at the one soul in Greyhold who held keys to every store and every gate, who had 30 years of the beast's grudging tolerance, the one soul the animal had growled at from the first night and every night since. The one Sorrel had hushed it away from a dozen times over without ever once stopping to ask why it would not let the matter go. She was up and moving before she had let herself finish the thought. The old still room beneath the kennels was Mirren's, and had been for 30 years, and Sorrel had every right to be in it, and had never before needed one. She lit no lamp. She knew the room the way she knew her own two hands, had ground 100 poultices at its bench as a girl with Mirren humming at her back. The purging roots hung where they had always hung, the stores stood in their patient rows. And low against the far wall, where the stone met the floor, one block she had leaned upon 10,000 times, sat a finger's breadth, proud of its fellows. It lifted out clean, the way a thing lifts that has been lifted many times. In the hollow beneath lay a soldier's oilcloth roll, and folded within it a stoppered vial of clear liquid that stank even sealed, of bitter almond, and a square of grey cloth stitched with a mountain sigil Sorrel had last seen on the shields of dead men at Marrowford, and a slip of paper, covered in a small neat hand, that was no cipher at all. That named a night, and a gate, and a price, and was signed with a single letter she knew as surely as her own name, because she had watched that same hand write out feed lists and fever charts and her own indenture papers across the whole of her remembered life. Sorrel knelt on the cold floor, with the proof of it shaking in her two hands, and could not make the world hold still. And behind her, out of the dark of the doorway, in the voice that had sung her to sleep as an orphan child, the voice she had loved better than any other in the world, Mirren said, very gently, "Oh, my girl, I did tell you to come to me first." Sorrel did not turn. She knelt on the cold stone of the still room with the vial and the grey cloth and the slip of paper in her two hands, and behind her, Mirren came slowly into the room, and the door drew shut, and the small, ordinary sound of the latch falling was the loudest thing Sorrel had ever heard. "You were never meant to find this," Mirren said, not angry, sorrowful. "Almost. I told you to come to me first. I have been telling you to come to me first your whole life, child. It is the one lesson you would never learn." "Tell me it is a forgery." Sorrel's voice did not sound like her own. "Tell me someone put it here to ruin you. Tell me anything, Mirren, and I will believe it. I swear before every god I will believe it. Only tell me something I can believe. I could tell you that." The old woman lowered herself onto the bench with the care of her years the way she had sat to grind poultices 10,000 times while Sorrel worked beside her. "But you would know it for a lie, and I have told you enough of those." I will not add to the pile at the very end. And then she told her. She told her of a girl carried down out of the high, cold valleys at 7 years old. The last time Caudmere went up into the mountains with fire, a scarn child taken as a spoil of war and handed to the kennels because she had a gift with frightened things. She told her of the long years of learning to smile in the tongue of the people who had burned her home. She told her of the man she had wed because he was kind and because a captive learns to take what warmth she can find, and of the son she had borne him, a boy called Coll, with the mountains in his blood and no memory of them at all, and of the season, the old king, Aldrich, father to the young man who holds his throne above them now, had raised the levies and sent that son north to die. Against the scarn, Mirren said. Do you hear me, Sorrel? He sent my boy to kill my own people, and my own people to kill my boy, and both of them obliged him. And when it was finished, he gave me this post as a mercy and told me to be grateful. And I was. For 30 years I was grateful. I curtsied and I smiled, and I raised his handlers' orphans. And I waited, because hatred, if you keep it, if you feed it, and never once let it slip its leash, will outlast anything. It outlasts the man who earned it. It even outlasts his son, and the beast, Sorrel whispered. The beast knew me the hour they carried it into this hold. A pup that could fit in a basket. Mirren's mouth twisted. It is a piece of that man's line, soul to soul, and it smelled the mountains on me, and the murder under my smile from the first breath, and it has wanted me dead every day of its life. It has tried to tell them since it was a pup. Not one of them ever listened, because it is only a brute, and I am only kind. Old Mirren, she looked at her hands. You were the first to look where it pointed. You always were the cleverest of my children. That is why I needed you near, where I could keep my eye on you, and that is the part I cannot forgive myself. Not him, never him, only you. I did love you, Mirren said, and her voice finally cracked on it. That was never the lie, not one single day of it. When I found you in the yard, with the fever still burning in you, I saw myself, another stolen child, with nowhere in the whole world to stand, and I swore you would not grow up as I grew up. Everything gentle that is in you, I put there with my own hands. And I meant to have you gone before the end. I meant to send you south with coin and a good horse and a story, days ago before any of this shut its jaws. You were never meant to be kneeling on this floor. You were meant to be safe and far away, and never once to know. Sorrel got to her feet. Her legs were not steady, but they held her. Then let me go up to him, she said. Let me warn him, and then go south, and never come back, and you will have your gone girl either way. I will vanish. No one will ever hear of me again. I cannot do that, love, Mirren. The gate opens tonight, the old woman said, very gently, and Sorrel felt the floor drop out from beneath the words. It is already too late to call it back. It was too late the moment you came down those stairs. All that is left to settle is whether you are up in that hall when it happens, where they will see the beast's warden and the traitor's girl and put the two together in a heartbeat, or whether you are down here asleep, well out of it, where I can still keep you clear of the worst of what is coming. She rose, and there was a folded cloth in her hand now, and the smell that lifted off it was one Sorrel knew in her bones, the heavy, sweet scent they used to put a screaming beast under when a bone had to be set. I am sorry. Of everything I have done, this is the thing I am most sorry for, but I have buried one child for that family already. I will not bury a second. Sorrel lunged for the door. She was quick. Mirren had taught her to be quick. But Mirren had also taught her every last thing she knew about how to bring down a creature stronger than yourself, without leaving so much as a mark on it, and the old woman was between her and the latch before she had crossed half the floor, and the cloth came down over her mouth and her nose. And the last thing Sorrel saw as the room tilted and the sweet dark came rushing up to take her was the slip of paper lying open on the stones, and the date written across it in that neat, familiar, beloved hand, and the understanding arriving far too late the way understanding always arrived too late with her, that the date on the paper was tonight, and that she could not move, and that no sound she made down here would ever climb those stairs in time. Sorrow woke to Belle's, and to Wenna's face, and to the taste of the drug still thick and sweet at the back of her throat. Gods, gods, you are alive. Get up. You have to get up. Wenna was hauling at her arms, weeping, wild with fear. They are saying it was you. Sorrel, listen to me. The whole hold is saying it was you. The night had come apart, while she lay senseless in the dark. She pieced it together, as they ran, out of Wenna's sobbing, and out of the smoke, and out of the shapes the guards were carrying down from the east range under sheets. A little after midnight, the postern gate had opened from the inside, exactly as the slip of paper had promised, and gray figures had come up out of the dark with mountain steel and gone straight for the royal tower, as though they carried a map of it. Because someone had been drawing that map for them across 30 patient years, they had not reached the king. The beast had reached them first. It had torn loose of its chains in the hollow the instant the killing began overhead, the way it always knew when its own soul stood in danger, and it had come up through Greyhold like the grey death of the old songs, and met the scarn on the tower stair and broken them, and taken a blade meant for Emeric through its own shoulder in the doing. The king lived. He lived because the beast had bled for him a second time. He was wounded and shut behind 3 deep rings of Osric's steel, and in the terror and the smoke and the confusion, one clear grieving voice had risen over all of it and handed the frightened hold a throat to put its knife to. Mirren's voice. She had done it beautifully. Sorrel could grant her that even then, even with her heart in pieces, on the stones. Who else could it be but the warden? The low-born girl, come out of nowhere, who had wormed her way close to the beast, and the king both, who slept in the very yard the assassin's monster had come from, who had been found, by poor, grieving Mirren's own tearful account, missing from her post the whole of the night. The gate was opened. A cache of almond poison and mountain cloth had been discovered. Mirren wept, in the warden's own cell, and gods forgive her. Gods forgive a foolish old woman who had loved the girl as a daughter and been paid back with a blade at the kingdom's throat. It held together. It held together perfectly, because it had been built too, patient board, by the one soul in all of Greyhold no one alive would ever think to doubt. They are coming for you, Wenna sobbed. Osric's men? They have already dragged poor Fen off for questioning, only because he carried your meals. There is a laundry gate, Sorrel, I will show you. You have to run. No, she was surprised how level it came out. Something had gone very quiet and very cold in her, down under the grief, in the place her hands lived, the place that never shook when the rest of her did. If I run, then I am what she says I am, forever. And she gets to weep over me prettily, in front of the whole hall, and walk away clean. No, then what do we do? Take me to him, but there was no reaching him. The tower was sealed, the king behind his rings of frightened steel, and the men on the doors had her face and their orders. She got as far as the foot of the tower stair before they closed on her, a dozen at once, and she did not fight them, because you do not fight frightened armed men in a narrow place. They forced her down onto her knees, on the stone with her wrists bound behind her, in the very courtyard she had ridden into as the beast's chosen warden not a single season before. And there, at the head of the steps, wrapped in a dark cloak, with grief painted flawless across her kind old face, stood Mirren. She looked down at Sorrel bound in the dirt, and for one instant, where no other soul could see it, the grief slid clean away, and what lay beneath it was not hatred at all. It was apology. It was a vast and loving and unbearable sorrow. Then the mask came down again, and she turned to the captain of the guard and said, in a voice pitched to carry the length of the yard, "Be gentle with her, whatever she has done. She was a child I loved, once." And, far below, in the sealed and empty hollow, chained again now in new iron, 3 times the weight of the old, The beast lifted its scarred head off the straw and found the thread of the girl its king's soul was knotted to, and felt her cold fear come down through the stone like meltwater, and began, very quietly, with the patience of a creature that has all the time in the world and only one thing left in it, that it loves to pull. They tried her in the great hall of Greyhold, at first light, because frightened and powerful people do not care to be kept waiting on their certainty. The charge was read out: treason and poisoning, and the opening of the gate, and every word of it was true of someone, and every eye in the hall had already settled on her. Sorrel stood in the middle of the stone floor with her hands bound, and said nothing, because there was nothing she could say that Mirren had not already made to sound like a lie. She had thought she would be afraid. She was mostly tired, instead, and mostly grieving, and beneath, both, angry in a way she had spent her whole, careful life refusing to be. They brought the king down to see justice done. Emmerich came in on his own feet, though it plainly cost him, one arm strapped across his chest, his face gray as old tallow. He lowered himself into the great chair and looked at her, bound in the middle of the floor, and she made herself hold his eyes rather than let the court see her look away. She could not read him. The ice had come all the way down, and she did not know whether the man who had kissed her over a sleeping beast believed a word his hall was saying, and the not knowing was worse than all the rest together. Mirren gave her evidence. She was magnificent, the way the very worst things are sometimes magnificent. She wept the right amount, faltered in the right places, told the hall how she had taken the girl in out of charity, and watched, too, trusting, as that charity was sharpened into a knife, and said it so well that half the hall wept with her. Sorrel understood she was going to die in this room, condemned out of the mouth that had once soothed her to sleep. The last thing the kingdom would ever learn of her, a lie told exquisitely by the woman she loved most in the world. "Does the warden," said the old lord conducting the trial, "have anything at all to say for herself?" Sorrel opened her mouth, with no idea on earth what would come out of it. She never found out, because that was the moment the floor of the world began to shake. It came up through the soles of their feet first, a deep grinding tremor, then iron shrieking on stone somewhere far below, and then the screaming began at the low end of the hall and ran up its length like fire through dry grass, as the great doors buckled inward off one hinge and the king's own horror came into the hall of Greyhold. It should not have been able to. There was chain enough on it to moor a ship, and it had dragged that up out of the hollow behind it, whole lengths still screaming from the iron at its neck, carving white scars across the flagstones. It came through the shrieking lords, like a grey tide through reeds, and did not spare them a glance, because it had not come for them. It came to Emmerich first, and set its bulk between the wounded king and the terrified hall. Then it swung its huge scarred head, found Sorrel bound on the floor, went to her, and put itself between her and the guards. And then it turned to the head of the hall, fixed its yellow eyes on Mirren, and made the sound Sorrel had heard from it only once before, in a lamplit tent a lifetime ago, the low, flat, murderous hum with no bottom in it. And into the ringing silence that fell after, Osric spoke. 6 weeks, the War Master said. I have watched that animal love exactly 2 souls in this world, and bare its teeth at exactly 1. He came down off the dais slowly, his eyes never leaving where the beast aimed itself. It is a piece of the king's own soul, and it has never once been wrong about a danger to him. I did not wish to believe it, because the danger it named was kind, old Mirren, whom we all love. He turned to the hall. So let us do the simple thing. Set the girl's cash before the beast, then set the beast's mistress before the beast, and let the king's own soul tell this hall which of the 2 it means to go for. Mirren's face did not change, but her hand moved, only a little, toward the fold of her cloak, and it was Sorrel, who had spent her whole life watching that woman, who saw it. She keeps the almond in her sleeve, Sorrel said. She always has. Ask her to open her hands. For one heartbeat, No one moved at all. Then Mirren ran. She was old and did not run far. She reached the side door, and Osric's men already held it, and she turned, and Sorrel watched the last mask come away from the woman who had raised her, watched 30 years of patience quietly set themselves down, and what lay beneath was so tired, and so full of grief, and so terribly like relief, that even then her traitor heart broke in two. "I would do every part of it again," Mirren told the hall, quite calm now, quite clear. "He sent my son to die and told me to be grateful. I have been grateful for 30 years. I am finished being grateful." Her eyes came to rest on Sorrel, and softened. "Only for her, not you. You were the one good thing I ever made. Remember that I told you the truth of that here at the end. When they spend the rest of your life swearing, I never once told the truth about anything." They took her then, and she did not resist. The scarn beyond the walls were already broken, and it was over, all of it, the long, patient murder of a royal house, undone in a single gray dawn, by the one creature that had seen it coming from the first hour. It was Emmerich, who cut her bonds himself, kneeling in front of the entire hall to do it, which was a thing no soul in that room had ever seen a king do. "You knew," Sorrel said, low, for the two of them alone, as the cords fell from her wrists. "Why the beast chose me. You have known for weeks. You would not say the word. I did not want it to be one more thing that happened to you without your leave," he said. "You have had a lifetime of those. The Omen, the Warden, and now this." He looked at her, and the ice was gone, all of it, and what lay under it was fear, which she had never once seen in him. A war beast settles for two people only, its bonded king and its bonded king's mate. It knew you in a field of dead men before either of us did. That is the truth this court will have of me now, whether I will it or not. So, I am asking you to be the last one to decide it. Not the beast, not the bond, not me. Stay, Sorrel, not as warden, not as anyone's omen. Stay, because you choose to, and I will spend my whole reign making certain no one ever again settles a single thing about your life but you. And there it was. The one question in all the world. She had no answer ready, for the hall was watching. The beast was watching, its great head at her side, spent and breathing hard. Somewhere below, a woman she loved was being led into the dark to die. And Sorrel, who had been named so many things by so many people in so short a span, the Omen and the Warden and the traitor, and now, God's help her, the mate, found she could not be named one more thing in front of one more crowd. Not even a thing she might in her heart have wanted. No, she said, not to him, to all of it, to the hall, to the crown, to the watching eyes, to one more grand tale told about her in place of by her. "Not here," she said, quieter, to Emmerich alone, and watched him understand it, and watched it cost him. "Not like this. I have been chosen enough for one lifetime. If I ever say yes to you, it will not be with your whole court looking on, and my mother's cell still warm below us. It will be because I walked back in through your gates on my own 2 feet, and decided it. And I do not yet know whether I will." They did not stop her at any gate. That was Emmerich's doing, though he never once said so, and she never thanked him for it. A king who had just told the full hall that the woman before them was his own fated mate could have kept her inside Greyhold with a single word, and instead he passed the quiet order to every gate that the warden went where she willed, and answered to no one, and then he left her wholly alone, which was the one gift she would have taken from him in those first gray days, and somehow he had known it. She went down to the cells before she went anywhere else. Mirren was to be put to death at the turn of the moon. There was no mercy possible in law for what she had done, and Sorrel did not beg for any, and Mirren did not want it. They sat with the bars between them, the way they had sat across a poultice bench 10,000 times, and for a long while neither of them found a single thing to say. There was a smell of damp stone and old rushes down there, nothing like the warm still room where Sorrel had grown up, and somehow exactly like it, because it had Mirren in it. She had rehearsed 100 furious things on the way down the tower stair, and could not lay her hand on one of them now. She could find only the shape of 10,000 ordinary evenings, and the one unbearable fact laid over all of them, that the woman who had made every gentle thing in her had also opened the gate. "I am not going to forgive you," Sorrel said at last. "I want you to know it so you do not spend your last nights waiting on it. I have looked for it everywhere in myself, and it simply is not there. You opened the gate. Men died on that stair. He would be dead, and the kingdom in the fire, if a chained animal had not loved him better than his own counselors did. I cannot forgive that. I will not. I know it," Mirren said. "I never once asked you to." "But I am here," Sorrel said, and her voice broke at last, "because you are also the only mother I have ever had, and both of those things are true at the very same time, and nobody ever warned me that you could hate a person and grieve them in the very same breath, and never be done with either one." She pressed her forehead to the cold iron. "You ruined it. You ruined the whole of what we were, and you did it on purpose, knowing, and I am still going to weep when they take you, and I hate you for making that true as well." Mirren reached through the bars and laid her rough old hand along Sorrel's wet cheek. One last time, the way she had the night. The whole thing began, and Sorrel let her. "Good," Mirren whispered. "Weep for me. And then live a long, long time, and be nobody's chosen anything. And let that be the shape of how I lose. There is no revenge on this earth, half so clean as you, walking free out of here and deciding your own life. And when you are very old, and it has stopped hurting so much, find one true thing to say about me. If there is one left worth the telling, that will be more than I have earned, and it will be enough." So Sorrel went. She did not say goodbye to the king. She could not have trusted her own mouth if she had stood in front of him. She said her goodbyes to Wenna, who wept and swore and packed her a bag far too heavy to carry, and to Fen, let go from his questioning and gone white with the relief of it. And she went down into the hollow one last time in the gray before dawn, and sat with the beast, the great scarred creature that had come up through a whole fortress in chains to stand between her and the world, and she took its enormous head in her 2 hands and pressed her face into the rough fur between its eyes. "You were right about her," she told it the whole time. "You were the only one of us who was right, and no one would listen. And I am sorry for it." It made a low sound, not the grief, and not the murder, something else, something she had not heard from it before, almost a question. "I have to go," she said. "I have to go and find out who I am, when nobody has decided it for me. Not the court, not him, not even you." She kissed the gray brow. "Keep him breathing until I come back. If I come back." The beast leaned its whole ruined weight into her, then slow and heavy, the way it had that very first night in the paddock, when it decided to live, and for a moment she nearly did not go at all. And Sorrel walked out through the gates of Greyhold alone, into the first hard snow of the long cold season, and behind her, in the empty yard, the king's own horror threw back its head and howled, once, a sound that stopped every soul in the fortress where they stood, and then went silent. The winter was long, exactly as the voice telling you this story warned, right there, at the very beginning, that it would be. Sorrel took work 3 valleys south, in a market town, where not one soul had ever heard of the girl the beast chose, under a name that was almost her own, tending the horses and hounds of people who paid her in honest coin and never once curtsied or sneered. It was good work and quiet. For the first time in all her remembered life, she was entirely unremarkable, and she had always believed that was the one thing she wanted, and she discovered slowly and with no small irritation that she had been wrong about it. Word travels north to south, the way it always does, in the mouths of traitors. She heard that the traitor beast-mistress of Greyhold had gone to her death when the moon turned without a word, and Sorrel walked out into the White Hills that day and did not come home until dark, and Wenna, who had flatly refused to be left behind and had taken the next cottage over, did not ask her where she had been. She grieved the way she did everything, quietly. With her hands kept busy, she set the leg of a carter's lurcher, and did not weep. She sat up 3 nights with a foundering mare and did not weep. And then one grey afternoon, a small girl brought her a half-drowned kitten, cupped in a cap, certain the horsewoman could mend anything, and she could not, and she wept then, for the better part of an hour over a scrap of a thing that had nothing to do with Mirren at all. Which was, she supposed, the only way grief ever cared to be paid, sidelong and late and for the wrong small reason. She heard other things too. She heard that the young king of Caldmere had changed, that he had turned his father's oldest counsellors out on their ears, and pardoned the boy Fen, and pensioned poor trembling Garrick, and filled his hall instead with plain-born people who told him the truth to his face. That he had taken no wife, though half the great houses of the north had flung their daughters at a suddenly unmarried king. That he ruled, they said, like a man quietly working off a debt. Fen himself came south once, on an errand he had plainly invented whole, and sat in her small kitchen, turning his cap in his hands, and telling her all the news she had not asked for. That the great hall ate plainer now. That no one at Greyhold said the old beast-mistress's name aloud any more, and yet her still room stood exactly as she had left it, the roots still hanging, because the king had forbidden a single soul to clear it out. He did not say why, Fen told her, mystified, and Sorrel, who knew precisely why, said nothing at all, and gave the boy a hot dinner and sent him home before dark. And once, only once, a letter found its way to her. That was the first thing she saw, and the thing that undid her entirely. A king may command, and this king had every right, in law and in the old bond, both to command her home, and instead, the letter asked her for nothing at all. It told her plainly, in a hand she had watched write out battle orders, that the beast was not eating, that it had not settled since the gates shut behind her, that it lay in the hollow with its head turned toward the south road and would take food from no living hand, and that his physicians feared for it, and that he was telling her this not to drag her back to Greyhold on a leash of guilt, which he knew full well he could, but because she had once made him swear never again to decide a thing about her life, without her leave, she had a right to know it. What she did with the knowing was hers, and hers only, and would stay that way, he wrote, for as long as it took, if it took the rest of both their lives. He did not sign it with a crown, he signed it with his name. Sorrel read it 4 times over, sitting on the step of a stranger's cottage, in a valley, her mother's people had once put to the torch, and then she folded it very carefully, and tucked it inside her shirt against her heart, and sat a long while in the thin spring light. "You are going back," Wenna said from the next step down. It was not a question. Wenna had given up asking questions she already knew the answers to. "I am going back," Sorrel said. "But not because a beast is starving, and not because a king is sad, and not because of any bond that any creature settled on my behalf before I was even born." She turned the letter over in her hands. "I am going back because I have spent a whole winter being nobody's chosen anything, exactly as she told me to, and it turns out that when not one soul in the world is deciding my life for me, when the whole of it is finally only mine to spend, the thing I decide entirely on my own, with nothing in the wide world tugging me but my own 2 hands." She stopped and laughed wetly at herself. "Gods, it is still him. I walked all this way to be free of it, and the thing I freely choose is the very thing every last one of them tried to hand me." I could scream. "Then do not scream," Wenna said. "Go and tell him precisely that. It is a far better thing to arrive with than a bag." She walked back in, through the gates of Greyhold, on her own 2 feet, in the first green of spring, exactly as she had promised the hall, a whole winter before that she would, and no one stopped her, because the order had never been lifted. The warden went where she willed. She had left through these gates in the first hard snow with a howl at her back, not knowing whether she would ever pass them again. She came back through them in green light, with her heart made up and her hands steady, and the guards, who a season before would have forced her down onto her knees, stood aside instead and bowed their heads. Sorrel did not know what they had been told in her absence, and found she did not much care. She had not come back for them. She went to the hollow first. The beast knew her step on the stair before she had reached the bottom of it, the way it had always known, and it came up off the straw, where it had lain these long weeks, wasting its face, to the south road, and it was thin, and it was grey at the muzzle. In a way it had not been a season gone, and it drove its enormous ruined head into her chest, hard enough to stagger her, and made the sound again, the question, and this time she had her answer ready for it. Yes, she told it. I came back. I told you that I would. Now eat something, you great grey fool, before he loses you out of sheer stubbornness, and I have washed you back to life twice over for nothing at all. It ate. It ate out of her open hand, in great tearing mouthfuls, while she knelt in the straw and wept into its fur, and laughed at herself for the weeping, and above them, unseen at the rail of the hollow, in the exact place he had stood, the first night he ever came to her without his crown. The King of Clodmere watched the girl who had come back on her own 2 feet, feed his dying soul back into the world, and did not dare so much as breathe. She found him at the rail when she climbed up out of the yard, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. And Sorrel understood, looking at him, that he had made himself untouchable again in her long absence, walled up and guarded and braced for her to have come back only for the beast, ready to let her go a second time without ever once reaching for the crown or the bond or the animal's grief to hold her, because he had promised. And he was a man who kept the cruel promises as faithfully as the kind ones. He stood there like a thing that had taught itself not to hope. He stood there, in truth, like the beast in the paddock a year before, the creature that had decided to die alone rather than let one more hand come near it. And Sorrel looked at the untouchable king, walled up inside his own guardedness, and she knew none better in all the world exactly what to do with a creature built like that. She had done it once before, with a bucket and a rag, and a great deal more nerve than sense. She had rather less sense now, and a very great deal more to lose, and she found, crossing the cold stone toward him, that it changed nothing at all. She did not wait to be invited. She never once had. She crossed the space between them and took his guarded face in her 2 hands, the same hands that had washed his beast in a field of dead men, and she said, I have decided, Sorrel, be quiet. I walked the whole way here to say it, and you are going to let me say it. Her thumbs moved along the hard line of his jaw. I am not your omen. I am not your warden. I do not care in the least what the beast knew, or the hour it knew it, and I do not care what any bond settled in a field before I drew breath. And I will not be your mate because some creature grew calm at the sight of me. I have thrown the whole of it out. I went and I stood in a valley with nothing on earth pulling at me. Nothing. No crown and no bond and no dying animal. Only my own 2 feet flat on the ground. She drew a breath, and the whole of her life narrowed down to the next word out of her. And I choose you, anyway. Not because I was chosen. Because I choose. You are the thing I picked when there was no one left making me pick anything at all. That is the only kind of yes I have ever had that was worth the giving, and it is yours, and it is the last one, I mean to say, to a question this size. So I very much hope you were about to ask it. Emeric, King of Caldmere, who let no one forget anything, who had never once in the whole of his life had to ask twice for a single thing, looked at the low-born girl with her hands framing his face, and asked it, not grandly, not for any hall, only the question itself, plain, in the cold, bright spring air, the way she had made him promise a whole winter ago, that one day, if ever she allowed it, he would. And Sorrel said yes. She felt it land in him the way you feel a held breath finally let go. Felt the last of the ice leave him all at once. And then his good arm was around her and her face was in the warm side of his neck, and the cold bright air was suddenly full of the sound of the beast, which had heaved itself up the tower stair after her out of sheer, flat refusal to be left behind, and now announced to the whole of Greyhold, in a voice that rattled the spring crows up off the battlements, that it thoroughly approved. What came after is nobody's business but their own, and the wry old voice that has carried you through this whole story has rather better manners than to follow a king and his chosen up a tower stair. So it will wait down here in the yard, with the beast, which has gone back to its supper and its long grey sleep and its wholly untroubled conscience, and it will note only this, for the record, and in fairness, since it did promise you at the outset to keep an honest account. The entire long, tangled, improbable business, from the first drop of blood in a paddock to the last soft word in the spring air, could have been avoided altogether if the king had only looked after his own beast. But then, of course, he would never have needed her to come and do it for him, and that in the end was the single piece of luck in the whole story that turned out to have been luck, after all. They will tell you, in Caldmere, if you go there now, that the king and his queen keep a monster. They will tell you it stands as tall as a plough horse, and is scarred like a boarding plank, and older by far than either of them, that it sleeps at the foot of the royal bed as it did when it was a pup small enough to hold, and that it has, against all sense and all its history, gone gentle in its grey years. They will tell you it lets the royal children ride it, about the hollow shrieking with delight, and that it has bitten no one since the morning it came up through the great hall in its chains, and ended a 30 years' treason with its teeth. They will tell you the queen was only a wound tender once, low-born, out of nowhere, and that she washed that beast in a field of the dead, before she ever knew whose it was, and that this is the reason it loves her, and they will call it an omen, and a sign, and the doing of the gods themselves. They are wrong about the omen, but they are right that it loves her, and if you asked the queen, she would tell you. The one small thing the songs always leave out. She would tell you that a beast so terrible went the whole of its long life with no name but the ones frightened men gave it, the grey death, the bone right, the king's own horror, and that on the morning she came home for good, she knelt down in the straw and gave it a real one at last. A small, plain, gentle name, the kind you give a thing you fully intend to keep. She has never told a living soul what it is. That name belongs to her, and to the beast, and to no one else in all the wide world. After a life of being named by everyone, she finds she rather likes holding the one naming that was only ever hers to give. And that, at the very last, is the end of it.